Tala had never imagined that her life would change in a single afternoon. She was an Apache woman who loved the open desert, the smell of sage after rain, and the sound of her mother grinding corn at dawn. Her days had always been simple and peaceful. She helped her younger siblings, gathered herbs with her grandmother, and listened to stories from her elders in the evenings. Life was not always easy, but it was her home, and she felt rooted there like an ancient tree whose roots touched the memories of generations. But the winter had been cruel, harder than any her people had seen in years. Many families lost their horses, and some even lost their homes to the cold, wind, and sickness. Then tension grew with the nearby settlers. Small misunderstandings turned into arguments, and arguments turned into fear. Fear always made things worse. When both sides felt unsafe, a meeting was arranged to prevent more trouble. Tala had stayed far from those talks, believing they had nothing to do with her. She did not know that the decision made that day would take away her freedom before she even understood what was happening. When the elders returned, her father called her to sit beside him. His eyes were heavy, like he carried stones in his heart. She remembered the way he took her hand gently, almost apologetically, as if he already feared how she would react. He explained that to end the growing tension, the two groups agreed on a marriage alliance. Someone from their tribe had to marry a settler so that both sides could trust each other. No one else stepped forward. No one else fit the demands of the treaty. So they chose her, not because she wanted it, and not because she volunteered, but because she was young, strong, unmarried, and without children. She felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath her feet. She wanted to shout, to run, to argue, but the elders told her it was the only way to keep peace, to prevent more suffering in the tribe. The cowboy she was to marry was a middle-aged man named Samuel. He lived alone at the edge of the valley. Tala had seen him once or twice from a distance, working with his horses, but she knew nothing about him. She had never spoken a single word to him. The idea of living in a stranger's home scared her more than anything she had ever faced. She felt like a bird being taken away from its nest. On the day she was taken to his ranch, the sun felt too bright and the air too still. Her mother walked beside her silently, holding her daughter's hand tightly as if she was afraid to let go. Tala kept her eyes on the path, trying not to think about the life she was leaving behind. Her siblings cried softly, but she forced herself not to turn back. If she looked at them, she feared she would lose the strength to keep walking. When they reached the small wooden house, Samuel stood on the porch with a nervous expression. He was older than she expected, lines on his face, tired eyes, and hands rough from years of work. But he did not look unkind. In fact, he looked more uncomfortable than she felt. He greeted the elders respectfully, then stepped aside to allow Tala to enter first. He spoke softly, saying she could take whichever room made her comfortable. His voice was low and steady, not demanding or harsh. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and leather. Everything was neat, simple, and surprisingly quiet. Tala felt her chest tighten with fear. She did not want to stay here. She did not want to be someone's wife. She did not want to be part of an agreement she had never chosen. But her people needed safety, and she had been chosen to help protect them. She reminded herself of this again and again, though the truth was still unbearable. Samuel kept his distance. He told her she could use the small bedroom on the left side of the house. He placed her few belongings near the door and stepped away politely. He did not ask her to talk. He did not try to touch her. He looked like a man who did not know what to do, a man who had been forced into a situation just as confusing as hers. For the first few days, the house felt hollow. Tala barely spoke. She spent most of her time outside, sitting beneath the shade of a mesquite tree or tending to the yard so she wouldn't feel trapped indoors. Samuel always kept a respectful distance. He worked with his horses from dawn until evening, feeding them and fixing the fences. Sometimes he tried to start a small conversation, but Tala would answer with one or two words, keeping her eyes low. She refused to eat at the same table as him. She waited until he finished his meal before she touched her plate. Samuel never protested. He simply nodded and continued caring for the house. He cooked enough food for 2 people, leaving her portion near the fire so it stayed warm. He did not push her to share meals or make conversation. He understood that she was uncomfortable and hurt, and instead of forcing her to adjust, he tried to make her stay as easy as possible. At night, Tala locked her bedroom door. She slept lightly, waking at every sound. She was not afraid of Samuel hurting her. Something in his eyes told her he was not that kind of man. But she was afraid of everything new, everything unfamiliar. She missed her family, her people, the warm sound of her mother's voice. She missed the laughter of the children. She felt like a stranger inside her own life. Samuel, in his quiet way, tried to help without making her feel pressured. He placed a small clay jar outside her door every morning with fresh water. He repaired her window so the desert wind would not chill her at night. He left an extra blanket folded neatly on a chair, just in case she needed it. He never asked her to thank him or even look at him. He simply did what he could and returned to his work. As days passed, Tala began noticing small things about him. He spoke gently to his horses, calling them by name. He worked hard but never complained. When neighbors visited, he never spoke about her or their situation, protecting her privacy. Once she overheard 2 men teasing him, saying his new wife wouldn't even look at him. She expected him to be angry or embarrassed. Instead, he calmly told them that Tala deserved respect and time, and he would not allow anyone to speak ill of her. Hearing that softened something inside her chest, though she did not show it. Still, she kept her distance. She did not smile. She did not speak more than necessary. She moved through the house quietly, like a shadow trying not to disturb anything. She believed that the more she stayed distant, the less she would feel the pain of the life she had lost. Samuel understood her silence better than she knew. He had lost someone once too, his wife, many years ago. He knew the look of a heart trying to hold itself together. That was why he gave her space. That was why he never crossed boundaries. Even though they lived under the same roof, he behaved like a respectful guest rather than a demanding husband. He hoped that one day Tala would see his sincerity, but he never expected anything from her. Tala didn't know it yet, but the quiet patience Samuel showed during those early days was the first small step that would someday change everything between them. For now, their home was filled with silence, distance, and 2 people learning how to breathe in a life neither of them had asked for. The weeks that followed moved slowly, like footsteps in deep sand. Tala woke each morning before sunrise, quietly slipping out of the house to breathe the cold desert air. She missed the familiar sounds of her tribe, the soft laughter, the crackling fire, the comforting voices of her family. In Samuel's house, the silence felt heavy, almost like it wanted to follow her wherever she went. She kept her distance from Samuel, speaking only when she had no choice. Even then, her words were short, soft, and careful. She did not want to show any emotion that might encourage him to come closer. She believed distance was the safest way to survive this strange new life. Samuel noticed her silence, but he never complained. He continued working the same way every day, feeding the horses, mending broken gates, checking the cattle, and repairing anything in the house that needed care. He moved with patience, never rushing, never raising his voice. And even though they shared the same roof, he gave Tala more space than she expected. She could feel the house trying to adjust to her presence. Samuel washed his dishes quietly so he wouldn't disturb her. He always kept the door open when he entered a room so she would never feel trapped. He even walked slower when passing near her, as if reminding her she was safe. But even with all his efforts, the silence between them was like a thick wall. One evening, Samuel came home with supplies from town. He placed a small cloth bag on the table and stepped back, giving her space. Tala glanced at it, wondering what it was. When Samuel noticed her curiosity, he explained softly that he had brought her fabric, colors he thought she might like, though he wasn't sure. She didn't touch it at first. She just nodded quietly and walked away. Later that night, when he wasn't looking, she opened the bag and stared at the folded cloth inside. He had chosen warm earth tones, reds, browns, and a bit of yellow, similar to the colors she grew up wearing. It made her chest tighten with a mix of surprise and sadness. She placed the fabric back carefully, wondering why he had gone out of his way to think of her. Despite his kindness, Tala still avoided him. She spent her days helping with outdoor chores, but always worked far from where he stood. She chopped wood only when he wasn't nearby. She fed the chickens only when he was out in the fields. When he approached, she quietly stepped aside. Samuel respected it every time. But the world outside their home wasn't always as patient. People from town had started to talk. Some whispered that Samuel had brought home a wife who didn't act like one. Others said unkind things about Tala, not understanding her culture or her situation. She heard little of it directly, but she sensed it in the way some people stared when she and Samuel walked into town for supplies. Their eyes followed her with curiosity, some with judgment, others with pity. Samuel hated those looks, but he never said a word. He simply stood close enough to show people she wasn't alone, yet far enough so Tala wouldn't feel pressured. He treated her with a respect most people didn't understand. One afternoon, Tala overheard a conversation between two neighbors while she carried water from the well. They didn't see her at first. "Samuel married that Apache girl," one man said with a mocking voice, "and she won't even speak to him. Should have known a match like that wouldn't work." The second man laughed. "Can't imagine living like that. A wife who won't even share a table? Poor Samuel." Tala felt heat rise in her chest, but not from anger alone. Shame burned like a small fire inside her. She didn't want to be the subject of gossip. She didn't want her presence to cause Samuel embarrassment. Before she could move away, Samuel stepped into view. His voice was firm but quiet, the kind of voice that made people listen. "Don't speak of her like that," he said calmly. "She is my wife, and she deserves respect. And her silence is not your concern." The men fell quiet, surprised by his steady tone. Samuel nodded to them politely and continued walking, carrying a sack of grain on his shoulder. Tala stood behind the well, hidden, listening. She felt something shift inside her, not trust, not yet, but something gentler. Samuel could have agreed with the men. He could have complained. He could have allowed them to laugh. But he defended her without hesitation, even though she had not given him anything in return. When he returned to the house later, Tala wanted to thank him, but the words stayed trapped behind her lips. Her heart wasn't ready. Instead, she kept her distance as usual, though her eyes followed him a little more than before. That evening, while Samuel prepared dinner, Tala stood near the doorway, watching him quietly. He cooked slowly, carefully, as if each movement needed thought. When he placed her plate on the table, he stepped away without expecting her to sit with him. He acted like every small kindness was simply his responsibility, not something to be rewarded. After he finished eating, he cleaned his plate and left the kitchen so she would feel comfortable coming inside. Tala stood there alone, staring at the warm meal. Her chest tightened again, not with sadness this time, but with the unfamiliar weight of gratitude. The next morning, Tala noticed something different. Samuel had placed a small wooden carving on the table. It was a simple design, a running horse. At first, she didn't understand why it was there. She touched it gently, tracing the smooth lines with her finger. When Samuel entered the room, he paused, surprised to see her examining it. He told her quietly that he had carved it for her, thinking she might like something small to decorate her room with. Her cheeks warmed slightly, but she said nothing. She simply nodded and took the carving to her room. Even though she still spoke little, her heart had begun to notice Samuel's constant patience. She found herself watching him from the window when he worked outside. She watched how he gently calmed a frightened horse, how he paused to fix a broken fence even when tired, how he stood alone at sunset with a thoughtful look on his face. He did everything with sincerity, never rushing, never acting with pride. She wondered if he was truly happy living such a lonely life before she arrived. The house felt too big for one man. The silence must have been even heavier for him before she came. Maybe he understood her loneliness, because he had lived with his own for many years. Even with these small observations, Tala still kept distance. Her heart wasn't ready to open. She still felt like a stranger in his home, and she still believed she needed to protect herself from growing too comfortable. But she no longer saw Samuel as a threat. She began to see him as a quiet man trying his best to live with kindness. One late afternoon, Tala was outside gathering firewood when she stumbled on a loose rock and nearly fell. Samuel rushed from the barn, reaching her quickly, but he stopped himself inches away, his hands lifted but not touching her. He asked if she was hurt. She shook her head, her heart beating fast. He nodded and stepped back immediately, giving her space. She watched him walk away slowly, and for the first time she felt a strange warmth inside her chest, a mixture of relief and something she couldn't name yet. The days continued like this, with small moments that gently changed the way Tala saw the man she had been forced to live with. Samuel did not demand anything, not even a smile. He simply worked, helped, respected, and remained steady. And though Tala still refused to let him get close emotionally, she could no longer deny that her fear was slowly fading. She didn't know it yet, but the distance between them was starting to crack, slowly, quietly, like thin ice melting under the spring sun. Something was changing, even if neither of them had spoken it aloud. Their home, once filled with silence, was beginning to hold something new, something fragile and gentle, something that might grow into trust if given enough time. The night the storm came, Tala felt something in the air before she even saw the clouds. The sky had been strangely dark since afternoon, and the wind carried the scent of dust and danger. She stood outside near the small garden, feeling the shifting air brush against her skin. A storm in the desert was never gentle. It came with force, with noise, with a kind of anger that shook everything in its path. Samuel was out in the fields checking fences before the wind grew stronger. Tala watched him from a distance as he moved quickly, tying loose boards, gathering tools, and guiding the horses into the stable. She could tell he was worried. Even the horses sensed something was coming. They stomped nervously and shook their heads. As the wind grew harsher, Tala went inside the house. She closed the shutters tightly and placed a heavy clay pot against the door to keep it from rattling. She tried to calm herself, but her heart beat faster with each rising gust. The roof moaned under the pressure of the growing storm. Suddenly, lightning lit up the sky and thunder shook the ground. Tala jumped, her hands trembling. She hated storms. Ever since she was a child, the loud noise made her feel small, like the world was falling apart around her. She sat on the bed, hugging her blanket close. Every sound made her more tense. When she heard the front door open, she knew Samuel had returned. He walked through the house, making sure everything was safe. His boots thudded softly against the wooden floor, steady and calm. His voice reached her door. "Tala, are you all right?" he asked gently, not touching the doorknob. She didn't answer at first. Her heart was too loud in her ears. Then another crack of thunder roared across the sky. and Tala flinched so hard she accidentally kicked over the small wooden bowl beside her bed. It rolled across the floor. Samuel must have heard the noise because he spoke again, a little more gently. "The storm will pass. If you need anything, I'm here." Still, she stayed silent. She didn't know what to say. She didn't want him inside the room, but she also didn't want to face the storm alone. A sudden burst of wind slammed against the side of the house, and the roof above her bed creaked loudly. She looked up in fear. Then, a drop of water hit her shoulder. She touched it in confusion. Another drop fell, then another. The roof was leaking, and the leak grew quickly, turning into a small but steady stream of cold water. Tala stood up, trying to move her blankets and belongings away from the wet spot, but as she reached for her things, the wind forced her door open with a violent bang. It swung so hard that she screamed and stumbled backward. In seconds, Samuel appeared at her doorway. He must have run the moment he heard the noise. "Tala!" he said, alarmed. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her breathing was fast and uneven. Rainwater from the leak dripped everywhere. The storm roared so loudly outside that the walls seemed to shake. Samuel didn't step inside. His hands were raised slightly as if he wanted to help, but didn't want to frighten her. "The roof is giving way," he said calmly over the noise. "You can't stay in here. Come to the main room. It's safer." Tala hesitated. She didn't want to move closer to him, but another crack of thunder made the decision for her. She hurried toward the door, clutching her blanket tightly. Samuel stepped aside, giving her all the space she needed. He guided her with gentle gestures, never reaching out to touch her. When they entered the main room, Samuel placed more logs into the fireplace to keep the house warm. The storm howled outside, shaking the windows. Tala sat near the fire but kept a careful distance from him. Her hands trembled, and she wrapped the blanket around herself even though the fire was warm. Samuel noticed her fear. "Storms can be loud in these parts," he said softly. "But the house is strong. It's held through worse." Tala nodded but didn't speak. Her eyes kept darting to the windows whenever lightning flashed. The storm was growing stronger, not weaker. Samuel quietly moved around the room, checking each shutter and securing anything that might blow over. He worked with calm movements, trying not to make any loud noises that might startle her. When the roof groaned again, Tala's breath caught. A strong gust rattled the chimney, making sparks jump. She instinctively stood up, her heart pounding. Another crash of thunder came, and this time she moved closer to Samuel without thinking, her fear overriding everything else. But as soon as she realized how close she'd come, she stepped back quickly. Her face warmed with embarrassment. Samuel pretended not to notice her moment of panic. He didn't react at all, which somehow made her feel safer. "You can sit wherever you feel comfortable," he said gently. "I'll stay over here." He took a seat across the room, far enough to make her feel she had complete control of her space. Tala sat down again, keeping her eyes on the fire. The flames flickered softly, casting warm light across the walls. Minutes passed in silence. The storm outside roared like an angry beast. Tala wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She didn't know how long they sat like that. Maybe an hour, maybe more. The storm felt endless, stretching out time into something unfamiliar. Finally, she found herself speaking without fully meaning to. Her voice was so soft that she wasn't sure he even heard her. "This storm. It reminds me of one from when I was a child." Samuel looked up slowly. "A bad one?" She nodded, staring into the fire. "Yes. It took our horses. It scared everyone. My grandmother held me all night because I was shaking so much." Her voice broke a little at the memory. She didn't talk about her childhood often. She didn't talk about anything, really. Not since arriving here. Samuel's voice was warm when he replied. "I understand. Storms take things sometimes. They're loud and they come with no warning. He paused, then added, but they always end. His simple words brought a strange comfort. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a tiny piece of the fear leave her chest. Another hour passed as the storm continued to rage. They did not speak much, just a few soft words here and there. But Tala no longer felt trapped in silence. For the first time since stepping into this house, she felt like she could breathe without her chest hurting. When the storm finally began to calm, the house grew quieter. The thunder moved farther away. The wind softened. The fire crackled gently, warming the room. Tala looked at Samuel. He sat quietly, eyes fixed on the dying flames, his expression calm. He had stayed awake with her the whole time, not out of duty, but out of care. That night, something changed inside Tala's heart. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the beginning of something like it. For the first time since her forced marriage, she didn't see Samuel as the reason she lost her freedom. She saw a man who respected her fears, her silence, and her distance without trying to break them. And though the room was still quiet, it no longer felt empty. It felt like a place where two strangers had begun learning how to understand each other. The days after the storm felt strangely different. The air around the house seemed softer, as if the fierce winds had blown away some of the heavy tension that used to hang between them. Tala woke each morning expecting the same cold distance as before. But instead she found herself noticing small changes she hadn't looked for earlier. When she stepped outside at sunrise, the world smelled fresh after the rain. The desert plants looked greener, and droplets of water sparkled on their leaves. She saw Samuel repairing the stable roof, climbing carefully with new wooden boards. He looked tired from the long night, but he moved with the same steady patience he always had. She watched him for a moment, surprised by the warmth she felt inside. Not love, not closeness, just a new understanding. He had stayed awake with her during the storm without asking for anything in return. He had given her space, calmness, and quiet company. That night had shown her something she hadn't seen before, kindness without expectation. She carried that thought with her when she returned to the house and began preparing breakfast early. She wasn't sure why, but she felt like doing something small to return the quiet support he had given her. She cooked simple food, bread warmed over the fire, boiled beans, and a jug of fresh water. When Samuel walked inside after finishing his work, he stopped in surprise. Tala looked down, feeling shy. She didn't know how to explain it, so she didn't speak. Samuel gave a soft nod. "Thank you," he said in a gentle voice. It was only 2 words, but they felt meaningful. She nodded once and stepped aside. He ate slowly, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. She waited until he finished before she touched her own plate. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like a peaceful pause between 2 people who still had much to learn about each other. Later that day, Tala found Samuel in the barn, fixing a broken fence rail. She stood quietly near the doorway, watching how he used his hands, slow, careful, respectful of the wood. She noticed something else, too. He was coughing more than usual. He wiped sweat from his forehead and leaned on the fence for a moment as if catching his breath. Tala stepped closer without thinking. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Samuel looked up, surprised to hear her voice. "I'm fine," he said with a small smile. "Just tired. The storm took more out of the land than I expected." But Tala recognized when someone was pushing themselves too hard. She had grown up among people who worked until their bones ached. She could see the same signs in Samuel now. His shoulders were tense, his breath uneven, and his eyes looked heavier than usual. "You don't have to do everything in one day," she said quietly. Samuel nodded. "I know, but the animals need the fences fixed. They depend on me." Tala hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, but she also didn't want him to push himself into sickness. So she stepped forward and picked up one end of the wooden rail he was lifting. She didn't say anything. She simply helped him place it into position. For a moment, Samuel stared at her, unsure how to react. Then he smiled. Small, grateful, warm. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from him since arriving at the house. They worked side by side silently, the comfortable silence of two people who were beginning to understand each other's rhythm. When the rail was set into place, Samuel spoke softly. "Thank you, Tala." She didn't look up. "You helped me during the storm," she said. "I can help today." Those words stayed with Samuel long after she walked away. He had not expected her to offer anything, not help, not conversation, not closeness. And yet she had stepped forward on her own, not because of duty, but because she wanted to. That evening, Tala prepared tea from herbs she found growing wild near the river. She carried the cup to Samuel, who sat on the porch watching the sunset. He was coughing again, softer but noticeable. She held the cup out to him. "Drink this. It will help your throat." He accepted it with both hands, touched by the simple gesture. "It smells good," he said. "It comes from a plant my grandmother used," Tala replied. "It calms the chest." Samuel sipped it slowly. The warm tea soothed his breathing, and he closed his eyes for a moment in relief. Tala watched him quietly from the side. "You don't have to help me," he said after a moment. "I know this life was not your choice. I don't expect anything from you." Tala looked out at the fading light. "I know it wasn't your choice either," she said softly. "We were both placed in this life without being asked." Samuel looked up, surprised by her honesty. Her voice was gentle but steady. For the first time, she was not speaking with fear or distance. She was speaking as someone trying to understand. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn pink and gold. The quiet around them no longer felt heavy, it felt peaceful. Later, as the night deepened, Tala found herself thinking about the stories her grandmother used to tell. Stories of people forced into new lives who eventually found strength through understanding and patience. She wondered if those stories were now becoming her truth too. Over the next few days, Tala noticed Samuel doing small things to make her life easier, placing tools where she could reach them, fixing the broken latch on her dresser, leaving fresh firewood by her door. These were small acts, but they spoke louder than words. They showed care without pressure. One afternoon, when the weather was warm and calm, Tala found Samuel sitting outside, sharpening a tool. He looked older in the sunlight, the lines on his face deepened by years of hard work and quiet sorrow. She wondered what memories lived behind those lines. She wondered if he ever missed the wife he had lost. She wondered if he ever felt lonely before she came. Without realizing she had moved closer, she found herself sitting on the wooden steps near him. Not beside him, just nearby, close enough that the silence between them felt like shared company rather than distance. Samuel glanced at her but didn't speak. He simply nodded in greeting, as if her presence was natural, not surprising. Tala looked out across the fields, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't know how to start a conversation, so she waited. After a moment, Samuel spoke softly. "This land used to be much quieter. Some days it felt too quiet." Tala turned her head a little. "You lived alone for a long time?" He nodded. "Many years." "Were you lonely?" she asked without thinking. He took a slow breath. "Yes, but I learned to live with the quiet." Tala looked down at her hands. "I miss my family," she whispered. "I know," he said gently, "and I'm sorry." His voice held no expectation, only understanding. For Tala, that meant more than any promise. That night, when she prepared tea again, she made a second cup and placed it on the table between them. Samuel looked at her quietly, asking silently if it was meant for him. She nodded once. He accepted it with grateful eyes. As they sat together in the soft glow of the fire, Tala realized something she hadn't expected. She no longer felt afraid of him. She no longer felt like she had to guard every part of herself. Samuel had shown her respect, patience, and quiet strength. Not once, but many times. And slowly, without forcing it, that had allowed a small trust to grow in her heart. It wasn't a sudden change. It was a gentle shift, like the desert after rain. The land didn't transform in a day, but little by little, new life began to show. Tala didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing clearly now. Samuel wasn't the enemy she once thought he was. He was a man who carried his own grief, his own silence, and his own hopes. A man who had given her nothing but respect, even when she gave him nothing in return. For the first time, Tala didn't see him as the stranger she was forced to marry. She saw him as a human being whose kindness deserved to be acknowledged. Something warm and fragile had begun to grow between them, something neither of them had spoken aloud, but both had started to feel. The cold night arrived quietly, without the warning of a storm, but Tala felt the chill settling into the house long before the sun disappeared. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders as she prepared a small fire in the main room. The flames flickered softly, casting a warm glow across the wooden walls. She could hear Samuel outside, finishing his evening chores, the faint sounds of his boots on dry ground echoing through the still air. Tala had grown used to these sounds. They no longer frightened her. They gave her a strange sense of comfort, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone in this new life. When Samuel finally stepped inside, brushing dirt from his hands, he looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. His shoulders slumped slightly, and his eyes carried the heaviness of a man who had been trying to carry too much for too long. "You should rest," Tala said quietly. Samuel paused, surprised to hear her speak first. "I will," he replied with a gentle nod. "Just making sure the animals are settled for the night." He hung his hat on the wall and moved toward the fire. Tala could see the strain in his movements, the slow way he lowered himself into the wooden chair. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt natural, like two people who didn't need many words to share the same space. She watched him for a moment, noticing the way his breath hitched softly, as if his chest hurt. Memories of seeing him cough during the previous days flashed across her mind. Without thinking too long, she went to the kitchen and prepared warm tea with the same herbs her grandmother used for healing. When she returned, she placed the cup in his hands. Samuel looked up at her, his eyes gentle. "You made this again?" She nodded. "It helps." He took a slow sip, letting the warmth of the drink soothe his throat. Tala sat down on the step near him. Not close, but not far either. Close enough to show she cared, far enough to respect the space they both had spent months guarding. "You don't have to take care of me," Samuel said after a moment. "You've already had to give up so much." Tala looked at him carefully. "I'm doing it because I want to," she said softly. "Not because I was told to." Those words struck Samuel deeply. He didn't show it with big expressions, but his eyes, but softer than before, revealed how much her honesty meant to him. He was a man who lived through loss, who learned to expect nothing from life. So hearing that someone wanted to help him, even in a small way, felt like a gentle light cutting through years of loneliness. They sat near the fire until the wind outside grew colder and stronger. It rattled the shutters lightly, reminding Tala of the night of the storm. But this time she wasn't shaking with fear. She wasn't hiding in her room. She was sitting here in the heart of the house, beside someone who had earned her trust slowly, patiently, day by day. When the fire began to fade, Samuel stood to add more wood. The flames rose again, casting a warm light that reached every corner of the room. Tala watched him, and for the first time, she noticed the small limp in his walk, a sign of an old injury, perhaps. She wondered why she hadn't seen it before. Maybe she had been too focused on her own fears to see his quiet pain. "You work too hard," she said softly. Samuel turned with a small smile. "Hard work keeps me steady." "Too much work can break a person," she replied gently. "You don't have to do everything alone." Her words made something shift in the air between them. They were no longer two people forced into a shared life. They were two people finally seeing each other clearly. Samuel sat back down, leaning slightly forward with his hands around the warm cup. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for the way your life changed because of the agreement. I would never have chosen for you to be taken from your family." Tala felt a heaviness in her chest. Not painful, but emotional. She had never heard him speak so openly before. His voice carried sincerity, regret, and something softer she couldn't name. "I know," she whispered. "I used to think you wanted this. But now, I see you did not choose it either." Samuel looked into the fire. "I only wanted peace between our people. I didn't understand how much this would affect you." Tala's eyes softened. "You have treated me with respect from the beginning, even when I was afraid, even when I said nothing." He shook his head lightly. "You deserved time. Fear doesn't disappear in a day." The room fell quiet. Only the fire spoke, crackling gently. After a long moment, Tala stood up and took a seat on the floor near the fire, closer than she had ever sat before. Her hands rested on her lap, calm and steady. Samuel looked at her slowly, not wanting to misunderstand. "Tala," he said softly, "you don't have to sit close if it makes you uncomfortable." She shook her head. "I'm not uncomfortable." He didn't move. He didn't reach for her. He simply accepted her presence, letting her choose the distance between them for the first time. Tala looked into the firelight, gathering her feelings. She had spent so long holding everything inside, fear, sadness, anger, confusion. But now those emotions felt lighter, replaced by something gentle and warm. "When I first came here," she began quietly, "I felt like a bird trapped in a cage. I thought you would try to take everything from me." Samuel listened quietly, his eyes focused on her. "But you never tried," she continued. "You never pushed me. You never raised your voice. You treated me like someone who mattered." Samuel swallowed, touched by her words but unsure how to respond. Tala kept speaking, her voice steady. "You waited. A long time. Longer than most people would." "I wasn't waiting for anything," Samuel said softly. "I just wanted you to feel safe." Tala turned her head and looked at him, really looked at him. The lines on his face, the tired eyes, the quiet strength he carried every day, all of it told the story of a man who had lived a hard life but kept kindness alive in his heart. She felt something shift inside her, something she had been afraid to acknowledge. It wasn't fear anymore. It wasn't pain. It was trust. Slow-grown, fragile, but real. With a steady breath, she moved closer, just a little, enough that their hands were within reach of each other, but not touching. She looked at him with calm, honest eyes. "I am not afraid of you anymore," she said softly. Samuel felt a tremor in his chest. He nodded carefully. "I'm glad." "And," she whispered, "I want us to build a life with understanding, not fear." Samuel's eyes warmed. He didn't move closer. He didn't touch her. He simply placed his hand on the floor beside him, close enough that she could reach it if she chose, far enough not to pressure her. Tala watched his hand for a long moment. Her heart beat slowly, not with fear, but with a quiet peace she hadn't felt in months. Then gently, she placed her hand over his. It was not a claim, not a demand, not anything rushed. It was a choice, her choice. Samuel froze, surprised and moved. He looked at Tala with eyes full of gratitude and respect. He didn't squeeze her hand. He didn't pull her closer. He simply let their hands rest together, warm and still. The fire crackled softly. The wind outside softened. The house, once filled with silence, felt alive with quiet peace. For the first time, Tala felt like this place could be a home. Not because she was forced to live here, but because she had found someone who cared for her with patience and honesty. That night, the walls between them finally disappeared. Not through force or expectation, but through trust, kindness, and Tala's gentle choice to step forward on her own terms. And in the quiet glow of the fire, two lives that had once been strangers slowly began to feel like one shared path.